Just a second here. So blurring here my background. And yes, I think we are good to go. Just a second more. Teams is not collaborating here. Okay. And the chat, not the chat, the list of people, so that I can see everyone here, and I think we're good. So we have 24 people. Thank you so much for joining us today. The Meetup MS Excel Toronto Meetup group. For those who are here for the first time, we would love to hear from you. Just if you'd like to type on the chat and just type 1 so that we know that you are attending the meetup session for the first time. It would be great to see who are the new faces with us and the new members with us today. Just a quick explanation about how the group runs. We started in 2019 May, and initially sessions were happening every month, once a month in person here in Toronto. But after the COVID pandemic started and everyone got stuck at home, we started running these sessions online. So the good news about that is that anyone can join as long as it is a good time for you to join us. And everyone can present as well. So now we can have people like Mark Proctor today, who is presenting from the UK. That's just fantastic. We are using Microsoft Teams to run the session. And you can see these icons somewhere. You should be able to see these icons somewhere on your screen. Depending on the device that you are using, they can be at the top right corner, or maybe for some of you at the bottom of your screen when you hover your mouse there, or you touch your mobile device screen. You should be able to see those icons. These two allow you to turn off and on your video camera and your microphone. When Mark is presenting, we usually turn off our cameras so that it's better for everyone in terms of the Wi-Fi, the bandwidth, and so that it's smoother for everyone, especially for those who don't have access to such good internet connections. And with this icon, you have access to the chat, and you are able to type there your questions or your comments, or you can raise your hand. If you raise your hand here with this icon, we will know that you have a question or a comment to make. Mark, I will introduce you in just a second, but I wanted to ask you, will you prefer people to interrupt you during the presentation or to ask questions more towards the end?
It's probably best to ask questions towards the end, just because there's quite a lot to get through. So I'd like to just kind of stick with the flow and then ask any questions at the end. I think is probably the best option.
Okay, so you've heard. You need to stay quiet. And then at the end, we will get through your questions. We will be monitoring the chat. And so that's it. Just a couple of announcements before we start the actual presentation. Our next session will be in October the 14th. We have a very special session that time because October the 17th is the spreadsheet day. And this year I thought it would be interesting to make something different just to celebrate that date. We will have these 4 amazing guests, and all of them on their own way have had the opportunity to participate in the history of Excel. Bill Jelen has, I believe everyone here knows him. He has one of the most famous YouTube channels and forums about Excel. He has been an Excel MVP for 16 years, and he's always presenting videos about the latest content available. Not only that, but also about the latest content, the news, the new features, the new formulas, everything about Excel. He is also an author and has written, I believe, around 60 books about Excel. So he knows what Excel is about. Ben Filstra was the person who put into the market, the first spreadsheet that ever existed, VisiCalc. He was the one who negotiated with Apple to get the program available on their computer, and people were buying both the computer and the program. And later he joined Microsoft team, and he was one of the developers of Solver, the add-in that we still use today in Excel. Rob Colley was also part of the Microsoft team and the Excel team a while ago, and he was in charge of creating the pivot tables and then all the Power Pivot or some of the Power Pivot tools that we also use today. So that was a very important mark in the history of Excel when we were able to get that type of feature in Excel. And David Monroy is working with Excel with Microsoft today in the Excel team. He is a program manager on the Excel team, and he will come to tell us what the Excel team is working on these days, what is their main focus, and what are they planning for the near future. We then have a couple of more events prepared for you. Some of them I still don't have the date, but we will have beginning of November. Raheem Ali, he has been here before, and this time he will be presenting about tips for data storytelling and dynamic and interactive charts in Microsoft Excel. We will have Ken Pauls on the 16th of November presenting a tool that he developed for Power Query to see how one of the things the tool can do, and it's very awesome. It's quite amazing what it can do. It's to monitor the time, for example, that a query takes to process. And that's not just that what it does. It's just one of the things that comes to the top of my mind now. He will be teaching us how to work with that tool that day. And we also have Brent Allen, who is usually here with us. I'm not sure if he will be attending today, but he's an active member of our group, and he will come to present about data model with cube functions, how to extract information from a data model using the cube functions in Excel. And of course, if you are interested in presenting to this meetup group, feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to discuss that opportunity with you. Just contact me on LinkedIn, for example, or through the Meetup app. You can reach me in different ways. And that's it. So I'm going to stop presenting and stop talking very, very soon. In fact, I want to present you something else very quickly, which is Mark Proctor's website, just so that you take a quick look at it and be able to identify it the next time you find it or search for it. Mark, you can't imagine the times that your website has been useful for me, because especially when I'm working with VBA and I'm looking for specific codes, lines, a lot of times my search ends up here. So the VBA library, and you have all kinds of code snippets, as you call it, in here. And I can't. I don't know how many times I've been here just because I Google it and Google brings me here. So thank you so much for that content. Not only that, but that in particular, it has happened with me several times. So here you can find code that is ready for a specific situation. And of course, if you are a VBA developer, then you need to adapt. You may need to adapt the code for to address your specific needs at the moment. Mark has a blog. He writes there very regularly, all kinds of content about Excel. This is a very clean website, very easy to navigate, find content there. So just wanted to show you that so that you will recognize it, because I'm sure you will fall in here. You will get here with your searches. So okay. Other than that, Mark is an accountant and has been working as an accountant for many years, right, Mark?
Yes, since about 2001, so 20 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So the work that you do comes mostly from accounting needs, let's call it like that, or you explore other types of scenarios?
So it's accounting, it's kind of financial reporting, and non-financial reporting, whatever the needs happen to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I will stop talking. I will leave the mic to Mark. Mark, please let us know about yourself a little bit, whatever I may have forgotten to mention. Thank you so much for being with us. I know it's late for you, and let us know what you have for us today.
Yes, I will go ahead and share my screen.
Just 1 second. Also saying if you need to make the content bigger on your screen, you can try to use the focus mode. If you can see that option under the 3 dots on Teams, the focus mode is what makes the presentation go full screen or something like that. So or if you double click in between the video or the presentation, you may also be able to switch in between the two to watch the video of the presenter or to see the presentation. Sorry, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, so I've actually turned my camera off just to help with bandwidth and things. I've tried to make my screen resolution bigger than it would normally be, so that hopefully people can see all of the information there. If anyone hasn't done so and they want to download the file for this session, if you go to https://exceloffthegrid.com/Toronto Meetup, you'll be able to download this file and you'll be able to work along if you want to. So yes, thank you, Celia, for inviting me. I've enjoyed a number of great sessions at this meetup over the last few since lockdown. So it's a real honour to be here and to share some of these things with you as well. So things about me. So I'm a dad. I've got 3 girls, which is exceptionally hard work. As it says there, 3 girls. Is it too many? But I've only got 1 wife, so that's probably about the right number. Yeah, I qualified as an accountant. I started working as an accountant in 2001, having done an accounting degree. And actually, my mum tells me that when I was 7 years old, I told her that I wanted to be an accountant. So even at the age of 7, I was either psychic or not very imaginative, because however many years later, that's exactly what happened. You can find me, as Celia has shown you, at Excel Off the Grid. I also have a YouTube channel, which I started during lockdown. And it turns out that when everyone starts back to work, you have a lot less time to maintain a YouTube channel, but I'm trying my best to keep content up there. Right, that's enough about me. Let's talk about Excel and ranges. So I stole this this image from Rob Colley and Abby Singh's book, so Power Pivot and Power BI, and it kind of maps out the journey that people take when they learn Excel. So we start off here with, people start with learning A1 plus B1 minus C1, so simple, selecting cells. Then after that, we might move on to some simple functions. And to use a function, you have to select a range of cells. So we use ranges there, and then we possibly move on to understand how we can add dollar signs to make those absolute or relative. And then we continue up this line. This might not be the exact order that you learn things, but I think you can probably appreciate that this is a familiar path. And then we end up with macros and array formulas, and then on to Power Query, Power Pivot, etc., etc. But it's interesting that the only time we really learn about ranges is when we're down here, which is at the start point. And often that is as much as we know about ranges and as much as we think we know about, or as much as we think we need to know about ranges. So in today's session, we're going to explore this a bit more and hopefully show you that actually ranges aren't just the thing that you learn at the start and then forget about, but actually that if you understand them enough, they can help you along your entire Excel journey. So we'll start off with, as the agenda says there, start with did you know, a few interesting features about ranges that can catch you out. Then we'll look at the range operators, range formulas, the name manager, tables, spill ranges, which are part of the new dynamic array features of Excel, and then looking at ranges in VBA. So let's start here with did you know? So here's a simple question. I don't expect you to answer, but what's the difference between typing equals A1 and equals sheet name A1? Because my guess is that for most of us, we think that they are interchangeable. So if we were to type a function such as SUMIFs, if we were to select a different sheet and select some things there, we get operators. But is there a difference between A1 and sheet name A1? So here we have a simple example where we have the numbers 1 to 6, and then the formulas here are just pointing to the cell on the left. As you can see, and then we have the same numbers here, the numbers 1 to 6, and instead this time it's referring to the sheet name and then the cell. Now I always thought that these were just interchangeable. You could use these in any way you liked, but there is a significant difference, and the only time I've ever seen this is when you select those cells and when you go data sort. So there you go, both those columns are sorted 1 to 6. If you select those same cells there and do the sort, as you can see, the first column sorts 1 to 6, but the second column does not. It's still referencing whichever cell position it was at the start. Now why that happens, I don't know, but once you realize that happens, you then pay more attention to how you type formulas and how you use ranges. Secondly, another thing about did you know? So here we have a external cell reference there. Now if I press Control and open square bracket, that should then open up that workbook. And if I put this that side and put this on the other side, you can see we're just referencing cell B2. Now over here we have a VLOOKUP, which is referencing the same sheet. And this VLOOKUP is driven by this cell here. But it's always looking up to the external sheet. Now what's interesting is that if I now close that sheet, and actually I'll then go and rename that sheet, so external reference, that's the sheet that it was called. I will now rename it. So it was renamed while it was closed. So if I now try and update that cell, again, Excel will go, I don't know what sheet you're talking about, I can't find it. But when we look at this VLOOKUP and we move that about, the VLOOKUP is more than happy to still update as if that sheet was still linked to the original cells. Now, why this happens is if we take my presentation here and I'll paste that, and then I'll rename that to a zip file so we get to the Excel package for that folder, and then I'll extract that. I'm sure Oakley's enjoying this at the minute. He likes a good unpackage of an Excel file to look at what's behind the scenes. So just while that extracts, and then I will So I've then gone into that file, and when I look at the Excel file, I then have this thing called external links. And when I click on that and open the XML, there you'll see that this sheet is actually the data that was in the VLOOKUP function. So whenever we reference a cell individually, Excel will reference to that cell. But if we reference a range within a function, what Excel does is it stores a local version of the range that we're looking up in the file that we've got. Which means that, so here I said, if we try and update that, it will try and find the file. But if we've got a VLOOKUP, even though that is looking up a file that's no longer there, it will still operate perfectly fine, which might be good or bad depending on your needs and circumstances. Okay, so that's did you know? Right, let's move on to some core range terminology. So there are
Celia,
yeah.
Celia, one thing, there is some users are saying that they cannot see the other screen. So
yeah, thank you for letting us know that. I was wondering, Mark, are you using because I wasn't sure if you were showing what you need to present or if you are looking at maybe another screen that we cannot see.
Let me share my entire screen. Hopefully that will.
So yeah, so when you are sharing, you need to choose if you are sharing a monitor or the application window, because if you share the application window and you move the application away, we go with you. So you need to share the monitor and then drag things out and okay.
So can you see that screen there now?
We can see the file explorer.
Yes, fine. Okay. So let me just open up the file that I showed you there, just so you can see how simple there. So if I click, word. So yes, if we open an external file, hopefully you can see that screen now. There's just a simple table on there. But if we were to, I said, rename that file, so that, or even delete it so it's no longer there. So if we try and open that, it won't work, but the VLOOKUP that we have that's linked to it will still continue to operate because a copy of the external file is saved within our own Excel workbook.
But will it maintain after you close the file? Do you know?
Yeah, so that file is currently closed. It's not even open.
No, the current file that you are showing now, this one, is that?
Yes, so even if you close this file or save it and then reopen it up, that VLOOKUP will still be maintained within that file.
Interesting.
Because it's stored, it's similar to the way I think Excel stores the new data types. That when you don't have the right connections, it still stores a copy of that data within the Excel file itself. So let's move on from there and let's look at the four main range operators that we have. So there is the colon, the comma, the space, and the new hash or pound symbol, depending on how you refer to it in your country. So we're very used to seeing the colon as the range operator. So when we type sum, we can select an entire range there. And we understand what that means. That says we're going to select a range that is from E3 to E10. When we sum that, we get a value of 90. Now, equally, we're kind of used to the union operator as well. And when we use the union operator, it's a comma, and we can kind of add cells together. Now, what's interesting about this is that if we think about it, or I think people tend to think about it as if it's a list. So as if we're summing E3 and we're summing E4 and E5 and E6. But actually what Excel's doing is it's treating that as a single range. So it knows that they're different blocks, but it's treating that as a single range, so a range union that is being joined together before it then sums those cells together. So that equally gets us a value of 90. Then there's the intersection operator, which we tend to use less often. So if we were to select some cells there, and I'll put a space, which is the intersection operator, and then put select those cells there, close that bracket. That gives me a value of 17. Because that's the intersection between those two ranges. And equally, if that range were bigger, that would give us a value of 34. Now, when we try and use these together, we have to try and be slightly careful, because there is an order in which Excel will try and calculate these. So if we were to select, say, the column south, and then the value 10, and then put a space for the intersection, and then select the cells there, what Excel is going to do is give us a value of 100, because what it's doing is it's calculating the colon first, then it's looking at the space, and then the comma. So in effect, we've got so this section here is calculated first, or I say the colons are calculated first, and after that you get the space. So that's then taking the 10, which is there, which is the intersection, and then it's using the union of the 10 with the other range there. So we get the 90 and the 10, which is those cells there, and that 10. So that's the 100. Now, if we were looking for, say, the 17 and the 10 to be the result that we were actually looking for, we would need to add additional brackets in there so that we calculated the union operator, being the comma, before it calculates the space. And finally, we have the new spill operator. So anytime we select a range of cells there, and this is only if you have a dynamic array enabled version of Excel. So there we get some values, and then we can type equals, we can select the cell and then a hash, and it will then return that spill range. And we'll look at spill ranges for more in a few moments' time. Now these four things, so the comma, the space, the colon and the hash, are kind of the core of how Excel uses ranges. And actually there's quite a lot that we can achieve just by using these four things. So here's just an example. On the left I have the Bank of England base rate as it was from January 2019. I've then got a chart of that base rate. Now, as we know, that the national banks, when they change rates, the change happens instantly. So actually having a line chart of that type is the incorrect presentation for that. It should be a step chart of some kind to correctly display how that how the data should be displayed. So that's where we're going to get to. But before we do that, I just want to take you to another concept to think about. And that is about the fact that when Excel looks at two ranges together, so in a formula or in a chart, that actually it doesn't think about the ranges in the same way that we do. So here's a simple sum if, or sum ifs, I should say. So we're taking the values from 06 to 017, and then we're saying that where the value in N6 to N17 equals alpha, that it should sum those results. Now, as I said, because of the way that we're built, we like things in lines, and in our mind that will make sense. Now, if we were to shift this by one cell, what happens in that circumstance? Well, actually, Excel doesn't think about things as being in lines. It thinks about those two ranges separately. So it thinks about them in terms of their relative position. So when it sums the alpha, it's going to look at the alpha there, and that's the first cell in this range. And it's then going to look at the first cell in this range over here. And that cell is north, so it doesn't have a value. And actually, Bravo is then 7, and Charlie is 12, and Delta is 17. So it offsets because it's thinking about the relative position of those items within the range. So if we were to sum that, it's the value 5, and that's because this cell over here, which is one cell up, has a value of 5 in it. So if I were to change that to a 10, you'd see that alpha at least what it thinks is alpha, has increased by 10 because that's the relative position. Now, we can use this similar concept when we think about creating a step chart. Now, if you were to Google how to create a step chart in Excel, I'm guessing that the first 10 posts would tell you that you need to copy the data and then create it in the right format so that you can then create your step chart. And I have got a post about this if you want to read it. And I think I'm probably way down on page 2 or 3. But the truth is, you don't need to copy the data. You can use the union operator, as we've seen from the previous example, within our chart source. So let's have a look at that. So select data. I'm going to select my rate. And I've got my cheat notes here at the top so I can remember that when I'm selecting the values, I want to select all except the last cell. Then I'm going to type the comma, which is the union operator, and then I'm going to select all the cells. Click OK on that. And then I've got my axis labels. And for that, I want to select all except the first cell, then a comma, and then all the cells again. So we're applying similar principles to how we looked at the sum if, but actually we're not lining up our dates and our rates in the same way. But what we're doing by doing this is giving Excel the correct relative positions so that we can create a step chart from our data without needing to copy anything or change our data in any way. It's still linked to that original source. And all of that is because we've used the union operator in the right way. As I said, if you want to read my post, feel free. That goes into more detail about how the calculations of that step chart works. But the purpose of it here is to illustrate how useful the union operator is in circumstances that we might not normally think. Now, the other key part of Excel and ranges is formulas. Now, when I assume that a number of you know about the COVID course that was created in, I think it was May or June. And at that session, I did a tutorial about ranges as well. And after that, someone wrote to me and said, you forgot about if and ifs as being range functions. And they're right, I had, so I've added them in here. But there are certain functions that return ranges. They don't just return a value, they actually return a range. And so here we've got a simple index function, for example, and we're looking at cells C3 to G9, and then over here in cell K3 we have the value 3. So we're saying C3 to G9, third row, and the third column. So that would give us the value 5. So that's what that VLOOKUP is looking at. Now there's a useful function, which is the cell function. If we type cell address and wrap that around the index function, that will give us the cell reference that is being returned by that function. So when I press return on that, it says E5. So that's the cell reference that is being returned. So what an index function actually does in this scenario is that it calculates the fact that the cell is in E5, and then by returning equals E5, Excel then goes to cell E5 and gets the value of 5, which is what it then displays. Now, if we compare that with VLOOKUP, for example, so if we were to wrap that in a cell address, press return, what you see is that we get an error, and that's because VLOOKUP is not a range function. It doesn't return a range, it just returns a value. So let's ignore VLOOKUP. Because I said it just returns the value 5. It's a calculation function rather than a range reference function. But we've got a number of other functions. So offset, indirect, choose, if, ifs, switch, which is available in 2019 and 365, and XLOOKUP are all formulas that return a range. So you can see in here examples of each of those. So when you get the example file, you can look at see how those formulas work. But each of them is wrapped in a cell function with the first argument as address. And there may be other functions. These are the only ones that I am aware of that actually return a cell reference. Now, one thing to note about the cell address function is that even if you've got a range of cells that are being returned, it only ever returns the first cell. So it's an indication that you've got a range, but it doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't give you the full range calculation. But we can combine the operators with these formulas to create some interesting results. So, for example, we could go down here and I could sum the index, and I could select the column south, and I might want to return all the rows, so that would be 0. So if I put a 0 into an index function as the row or column number, what it means is that it will return the entire range of cells. So if I'm at one column, close that. So that should be 75. So that index function is returning all 75 values. Now what I could do is then, so with that sum, I could then use the intersection operator, which is a space, and I could use an offset. And I could select that cell there, and I want offset by 0 rows, 0 columns, like 1 cell high and 5 cells wide. Press return, and I get the value of 17, which would be the intersection of this range here and this range over here. So that's that value 17 there. Equally, we could create a dynamic range of other kinds. So you could do equals choose. I'll use a sum again. And let's say I'll put a choose of 1, and my first value is that. So choose, I'm saying select the first argument in that choose function. I could then put a colon, which is our range operator, and then I could use an indirect. I could have an indirect with, say, E8. And that's summing 72, which I think should be down to, yeah, so those cells there sum to 72. So anytime that we've got a cell address in a function, we can replace that cell address with one of these other functions because they return a range. And as long as we treat our operators correctly, then we can combine those operators and formulas together to create ranges of different sizes, or to be quite dynamic in what we need to calculate. Right, let's now, having looked at those, and that's kind of the basis of how Excel works and uses ranges. And actually, if you think about everything about ranges and everything that we look at after this, it's all based on these principles of operators and formulas. So let's just move on to think about the name manager for a few minutes. So there's a few things I'd like to show you on here. Some of these might be more tips and tricks rather than anything else. But so the first one there, if you have got a named range, you can zoom out to around 39%. If I can hit 39%, I bet I can't almost, and it will tell you the name of where you have a named range. So any named range that you have on your Excel worksheet, by zooming out to 39%, that will then display what that range is. Another thing that's worth noting, that where we have named ranges that are at a workbook level, if I were to move and copy and create a copy of that to a new workbook, so hopefully you can see that, and we haven't got any of the issues as before. So I've copied that sheet. Now what's actually happened is that if we go to formulas, name manager, is that it's copied all these named ranges, which are not necessarily in our workbook. We had the one workbook called name, or the one named range called my named range. The picture lookup, the chart data and chart labels are actually other named ranges that apply to other workbooks within our workbook. But because we've copied that sheet, it's going to take any named ranges that we have within our workbook and it's going to transfer them with the sheet that we've copied, even though that named range wasn't created on that sheet. So when you copy sheets, we need to be aware of what named ranges we have that we've created at the workbook level, because they will transfer when we copy a sheet. So next, creating named ranges quickly. If we have a set of data there and we want to create some named ranges quickly, there is this button here that we don't often see or use. So create from selection. I can click that and it says where are the names that we want to use. We've got top row and left row. You can click OK on that, and that's now created a whole load of named ranges for us automatically. We can also use this box up here. So as I showed you, we can navigate to a named range. We can also use the box up there to navigate to any cell that we want. So if you've got a really long worksheet that you know has got about 15,000 lines or 100,000 lines, you could type the number in there and you could get straight to that cell rather than having to scroll down and find out where the bottom of that data is. Now, once we have these named ranges, we can create a kind of pseudo two-way lookup. So for example, I could say north and echo. Because we have these named ranges, so I've now looked up the value of 13 from those cells just by using the two named ranges that we created before. Now, another interesting feature of ranges is to do with absolute and relative referencing. Now, I think it's probably safe to say that most of us understand that if I select a cell and then add some dollars on there, that that cell remains fixed because it has got dollars on it. So it's an absolute reference rather than a relative reference. Now, what's interesting is when we create a named range, so if I call this cell above, you'll see down here that it's selected the G12 because that's the cell we're in. Now, if we were to select cell G11, so that is the cell above where we've currently selected. Now, if I take the dollars off that, that then becomes a relative reference. So we're in cell G12, which is our selected cell down here, and we've said that it refers to cell G11. Now, we can do better than that. We can also take off the workbook name and just have an exclamation mark and G11. If we click OK on that, I can then use my named range, cell above, and that will automatically, it doesn't matter where it is on the worksheet, that will always refer to the cell that is above it. So even if it was over here, it would refer to, that doesn't work for some reason, but it always refers to the cell that is above. Now, because we didn't include oh, I know why, it's because I need to be on, close that one. Right, back over here, okay. Let me just create that named range again. I was on the other sheet, wasn't I? So, so there we go. I now have my cell above, which has not worked. Give me a second here. Julia.
I think you forgot to delete the exclamation, or is that what you want?
No, the exclamation mark is there.
Okay.
It's because I was referencing it to its own cell.
Oh, okay.
So the cell above, by using the exclamation mark, what it means is that that is now free to be used on any worksheet. So that cell above can be used on any worksheet you want. So even though it was created on a specific worksheet, it doesn't refer to any worksheet in particular. It is relative to whichever sheet you're currently on. So that means that even if somebody drags down a cell, you could go the sum of cell there. We can use our union operator, and then we can do our cell above. So it doesn't matter how somebody drags that down, that will still calculate our formula correctly because it's always looking at the cell above. Right, now here's another interesting feature. So let me select these cells here, and I'm going to set a print range. So there I've created a print range, and if I look at that, let me put a width of 1 page. So if I go into my name manager, I have my print area there, and that is equally just a named range. And we can put into a named range, we can put a formula. So in here, I could use the switch function, for example, because the switch function returns a range. And I can say that if that cell there, oh, hang on. That cell there, if it equals summary, then I want to select those cells there. Or if it says, oh no, hang on, that should say full. Or if it says summary, and just select those cells there. Close that, click that right, click OK, close that. Now if I try and print that, you'll see that we have our summary selected there. Equally, if I change this to full, let me try that again. Full, there we go. So if it says full, I want to select the full range there, comma, here we go. So if I select full, the print, it's going to print the full range there. Equally, I can select summary. And our print area is now dynamic, dependent on the drop down that we've selected. So we can create dynamic print areas by using a simple drop down box. Now, I would say that with this technique, as soon as you try and use your page settings, it will fix the range that you're currently on. So you have to kind of set your page settings the way you want at the start and then apply that technique. Now, if anyone is an Excel developer or you prepare things for other people to use, there's one thing that we all know, and that is that users do almost anything and everything. So if there is something that you think no way would anybody ever do that, there's almost a guarantee that somebody will. So if you've created a workbook that has a lot of named ranges in it, it might be a good idea to try and hide those named ranges so that people can't mess with your workbook. So let me just create my ranges on here again. So I go developer, Visual Basic, and I've got some code in here already written. So hopefully you can see the Visual Basic window and also the Excel window at the same time. Celia, if that's not the case, then just let me know. So here we've got our named ranges. Now, if there's a specific named range that we want to hide from users, we've got a macro there that will hide our alpha named range. So it's now not in our list of named ranges, or we could hide all of our named ranges. So by running that macro, that would hide all of those. And hopefully, if you want to copy any of this, you can see that code on the screen there. Now, having hidden them, when we get our workbook back, it might not be that useful. So we've also got the ability to unhide them with this macro here. So by using macros, we can kind of protect our workbook from users who might try and tinker around with what we've done and potentially break some of the things that we have built. Another place that ranges get used is in pictures. So if I were to select some cells here, for example, select those, I could copy that, I could go home, paste, special, I could choose a linked picture there. Now in my named range window, I've already created a range called picture lookup, which is a lookup function which is based starting on cell C4, and then its height is then based on this cell over here. So I could select that and then reference it to a named range. If I just hide the grid lines on that to make it slightly more viewable. So I can then change the size of my picture because I have a named range, an offset function, which is then driving that formula. So offset was one of the range formulas that we looked at the start. So there's some key things about the name manager. Now let's move on to another quick example. I won't go through this example in detail, but I'll just explain how it works. So here we have our data up here, and we have a number of selection boxes. And when we use those selection boxes, our chart there will automatically update to display the relevant information. So there for product alpha, we have a value of 20, value of 25, value of 20 again. And we can also change our start point and end point for our data, and that will automatically update depending on the selections that we've got. And all of that is based on, again, a named range. So here in the workbook, I've got one called chart data. So if I edit that, select all, if it'll let me. It does not. Let me get back into that. And just for ease, what I'll do is I'll put that formula on the worksheet. What we have here is two index match functions that are basically just looking up the cells that we want to use. So we've got an index, which is a formula function, and then we've got our colon, which is our range operator, and another index match. And by doing that, we're creating a dynamic range that we can use as the source for our chart. So that's in the example workbook. You can look at that further to understand how that works. Now let's move on to think about tables. So tables came in Excel in 2007. Actually, I think they were in 2003, and they were called lists at the time. But they've got roughly the same functionality from 2007 onwards. Now, one of the things that when we press Control T to create our table, Excel will use what's known as the current region. And the current region is based on a range where if your range has any cell that is connected to it, then that is deemed to be part of your current region. So here we have our table. Now, if there's any value in any of the cells around there, that will become part of our current region. So, for example, even if I type the word test in there, because that is connected there, it would deem that that becomes our current region. And this is the same concept as is used in VBA. So even if we had another value of test here, because that's connected to that one by that bit there and that's connected there, then all of that would become part of our current region. So whenever you're creating a table, just be aware that that's how Excel decides what area it should use when creating a table. So if I press Control-T to create a table in there. Now we'll stick with the name of table 1. That's fine. Now when we start to use tables, so if I were to put equals and I select the value in the column south, that gives me the the formula of equals table 1 square brackets at south. Now it's possible to think that what we're asking for is that we want that value from the column south, but actually this is a prime example of implicit intersection. So implicit intersection has been in Excel, I think, probably from the beginning, and I think it probably came to the fore more when we've started to look at dynamic arrays, for example. So as a simple example of implicit intersection, if I had 3 cells here, and I was to type equals, and I'll select that range. So we've given Excel a full range of cells. Now, because I have a dynamic array enabled version of Excel, when I press return, it will spill all of those results. But if we put an @ symbol in front of that, it will only give us the intersection between the data that we've selected and the row that we're in. So it's actually saying select all of that and then provide us with an intersection across there. So it's the intersection of that range and that row. So that's why it returns a value of A. I went down here, let me drag that up. Come down here, as you see, we've selected the same range as before, but it's going to give me a value of C because we've got our range here and our intersection across there. That does mean that if I were to select a cell outside of that intersection, I should have put some dollars on there, shouldn't I? I get a value error because there is no intersection between those items there. So we get a value error. Now, what that means is that when we come to a table, I'm not saying that we should select the value from the south column. Actually, we're saying take the full range of south and then give me the intersection that's in the same row, which is the value of 11. So implicit intersection works in a similar way to our intersection operator, which is the space character. So whenever we're referencing a cell within a table, we are always using an intersection method if we're referencing a cell in the same row. Now, when we work with tables, just moving on to the next example now, one of the most frustrating things is that we can't use dollars. So we can't fix in our data in the same way as we could. Before, we could select a cell, we could press F4 a few times, it would add in the dollar symbols and would then fix that cell reference. Let's show an example of how we can achieve a similar effect with tables. So if I were to select, so I've got table 1, the column north, and we're going to look up the product column, and I'm going to say where that equals alpha. I will put some dollars on that, close that bracket, press return, and I get a value of 32. Now, when I drag that along, what we find is that while that works, When I click on the next range, see both those ranges have moved along. The way to get around this is that the cell you want to freeze in a specific position, you add an additional square bracket, a colon, then you repeat the same table name again, and you square bracket to close that. And when I press return this time, drag that along, there you go. So our product column is now frozen, but our table that we're summing, the column that we're summing, sorry, actually moves. And we can do the same with a row context. So as we saw before, we get a table 1 at east. Now an easier way to do this, and even if you're working with columns, is actually just to select both. It gives you that, it gives you the syntax that you need to use, so we can fix that in place there. And equally, when we drag that along, it fixes that cell so that it doesn't move. So there's some tips about how we can use tables and some of the issues that we have when using ranges with tables. So let's just move on now to think about the spill range or the hash operator. So anyone who has got a dynamic array enabled version of Excel will be enjoying these features. At least I hope you're enjoying these features. But let's just look at how some ways that we can use this spill operator with some of the things that we've already learnt from some of the previous examples. So I'm just going to create a basic dynamic array function here. So run type equals filter. Select my array of data there, and I want to include where those cells are greater than or equal to that cell there. Close that bracket. If I change that to 50, for example, my filter function updates so that it gets the right number of items. Now the spill operator, as we saw right at the start, is that if I select the top cell, so you can see there's a line around there, that tells me what my spill range is. If I select the top cell in my spill range and type a hash, it will then pick up my dynamic array range or the spill range, and then it can use that. Now, one thing that can be quite, I'm not sure, I haven't yet decided whether this is useful or just interesting, is that, so at the minute, all we've got is our data. But what happens if we want to replicate our column headers as well? Well, in that scenario, we can take our E6 hash, we can use our union operator and select a cell above. Now this, in my mind, is the wrong way around. Normally you'd go E5 to E6. But in this circumstance, what will happen is it will then give us our header row. So if I just move that to be up here, and take that item out. There you go. So I've used some formatting up there already, so that it then uses our header row as part of the spill range. Now we can also use this same concept in a named range. So let me just create a named range here. I'll call it spill union. And that's going to equal, so E6 hash colon E5. And I'll click OK on that. Let's just check that this works. Spill union, there you go. So that named range now references that information there. Now what is interesting is that because we now have a header row, we can now use our dynamic array as a source for a pivot table. So if I select so insert pivot table, that's far enough away, that's good. So insert pivot table. Now anytime you've got a named range, a useful shortcut is F3. It brings up a list of all the named ranges that you have in your workbook. So I can select my spill union. Okay. I now have a pivot table, which I can put my item in my rows and my count in my values. And there we have a pivot table that is now based on my spill range. Now, because we have a header row, we can equally use that same data within Power Query. So now, normally within Power Query, if we want to insert a named range into a query, we would select the named range and then we would click Data from Table/Range. But because our query, because of our named range is dynamic, that means it's not selectable in any of our drop downs. So instead, what we have to do if you want to get the data into Power Query is to go Data, get data from other sources, blank query. Power Query will open up. It's taking its time. And we can type, so we've got a blank query here, equals Excel dot current workbook. That will bring up all of our ranges, whether they are a fixed range or a dynamic range. I can select my spill union table. It's got my header items there. And I can close and load to, I think that's close and load there on the workbook. And there we have a query in Power Query that's linked to the result of a dynamic array. So if I were to change that to 100, for example, they would change. Obviously, we need to press refresh all. And there we go. My pivot table and my query have both updated. Now, where this becomes really interesting, and I can't claim the credit for coming up with this technique. I don't know. I think it was John Akinpora who, from Excel Campus, who first managed to put this together. So I'll just share this with you because I think it's a fantastic technique of how we can use some of the things that we've looked at. So if I create here another filter function. So filter, and I'll select my data, include where that is greater than 100. Let's go greater than or equal to. So we've got 3 results there. Now, one of the frustrating things about dynamic arrays is that you can't add a total row to the bottom. Well, using the techniques that we've already used, maybe we can. So we know what let's say we've got a header of item and count. And then we want to add on a total. But for this technique to work, we need to add the total row above our data. So this is a total row. We're going to use the sum. We're going to select our spill range. Actually, we're going to use an index. But the source is our spill range. We want all of the rows returned. So that's a row number of 0. And we want column number 2. Yes, I'll accept that. That gives me a value of 320, which if we sum these cells here, that equals 320. Equally, if we change this to 50, those cells there add up to 480, as does my total. Then what we can do is create an index column. Let me just move this across one. We can create an index column, and this index column is to help us determine which order we should display our results. So I'm going to use a sequence function for this, also a new dynamic array function. And I want a sequence of the rows of F26 hash. So there we've got however many rows in our result, 5 results. Now our header row is always going to be at the top, so that's going to have an index of 0. And then our total row is going to be the max of our sequence plus 1, which gives me a value of 6. Which means when we come over here, what we can do is create a sort by. We're going to select the cell F26 hash colon up to the total row, and we're going to sort that by our sequence function hash union operator, range operator. Let me close that. Press return. So we now have our item header and we have a total row. Now, unfortunately, dynamic arrays don't work particularly well with conditional formatting. So we do have to select a range that's slightly bigger than what we've got. Go home, conditional formatting, new rule. And then we can use some formulas on there to say that where that. Take off the 24 equals total. If that's true, let's make it font bold, have a top border. Okay. There we go. So we now have, from a filter function, we have the total of our filter. So if I were to change my size up here back to 30, there you go. Our count of those items is now 550, and we've got a total row at the bottom of our range. So that's how we can use the spill of the hash symbol or the spill range. So the spill operator with the union operator to create some interesting results. So where we've used a pivot table, Power Query, or even created a total at the bottom of our results. So just a few more things to show you, just to kind of finish this off. So VBA, let me, still got our developer window open from before. So here all we have are a few basic examples of how we can reference ranges in VBA. So I've already created 3 named ranges. So that's called range 1, that's range 2, and that's range 3. So I'm just going to run these macros and we'll just talk about the results as they come through. So first of all, if we reference a cell A1, obviously our address for that is going to be cell A1. Our range, this is how we traditionally refer to a range in VBA. We have the range, and then in brackets we have the range name, and that would give us the result of C2 to D13. So that's the whole of that range 1 there. Equally, we can use the evaluate feature of VBA, which is a short way of referring to a named range. So here, rather than worksheet range brackets and then the name of the address, we can put our range name within square brackets, and VBA will recognize that as a range. So there we have that item there, give us the same result. And then finally, let's just use this line of code here. So the current region, as we looked at before, Excel looks at what's what's got an entire cell around it. So we're looking here in cell G17, which is this cell here. And as you can see, there is a range around those cells, which is there, which means that our current region is F13 to H17, which means the word is currently left out of our current region. Now, if we look at the, in VBA, if we use the intersection method, I'll just make that bigger. So we often use the intersection method when we're working with the worksheet change event. And we often go application where the intersection of range 1 and range 2 but actually we can use the same intersection operator as we use in Excel. So we could just use a space character. So let's just look at that as an example. So here, so my first macro here is going, right, what's the range that we're traditionally using in Excel if we were to use intersection? And the intersection between range 1 and range 2 is here in cell C7 to D10, so this box here. But equally, if we use Excel's method with the space being the intersection operator, it gives us the same result. So we can also refer to the name in that way. And then finally, if there's no intersection, as there isn't here, as you can see, range 1 and range 3, then we do need to catch that error, as you can see the code there, or else it will give us an error code 1004. And finally, just to close this off by looking at the union operator, again, the same things apply. We have in VBA application.union to combine ranges together, and that's traditionally the method that I think most of us would use if we were using VBA, but equally we can just use the comma and list out our ranges as if we were using a standard Excel union operator. So if we were to run that, so this is this first line here, so we're selecting all those cells there. So C2 to D13, and then also B7 to G10. So that is a single union range. And if we use Excel's union operator, again, we get the same result. But we don't tend to use that in VBA, and I'm not sure why. It's just not the way that anybody appears to use it. So that's the end of my examples. In summary, some of this might be useful. It might be interesting. It might give you the answers to something that you need. Because of the way, I think with a lot of these areas, when we think about ranges, it's not, a lot of this isn't useful until you need it. And then as soon as you need it, you'll go, I learned something about ranges. And then hopefully you can then either remember or refer back to this, and it can help you when you're in a tight spot. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that we have the union operators of colon, comma, space, and hash, and we have formulas. And everything else that we've looked at is built off that or around that and has used those things in that way. So that's it. I will now have a look at the chat window, because I've not been paying attention to it at all. So back to you, Celia.
Thank you, Mark. This is amazing. Such a wonderful and brilliant set of tips and knowledge. A lot of things there I didn't know. Other things, like you say, we kind of find them when we need them, and then we don't need them anymore and we forget. But a lot of things new to me, I must confess. And so thank you so much for putting this together. It's an exhaustive list of things just about ranges in from all kinds of perspectives, the dynamic arrays, the VBA, and it's just amazing. Thank you, Mark. I've seen some comments or questions.
Yes.
Right at the beginning, when you were showing that example with the VLOOKUP formula, yes, that was a link to a file that then you would change the name of the file. But the VLOOKUP would still work.
Yes.
Someone was asking, what about if we change something on the file, but the file is not the same anymore. So if you change something on the new file, it won't update.
So because that file is no longer, it's not there, you can change that file to your heart's content, and it won't ever change the VLOOKUP, because your VLOOKUP is looking to a file that isn't there. If that file would be there, when you open up the workbook and it says, do you want to update links, and you click yes, it will then go and find those links. But if that workbook said its name changed, you can change that data as much as you like. Excel isn't looking at it, and your Excel file doesn't even know it's there. So yeah, so no, it won't make any difference unless the file has got the same file path as what it had in the original VLOOKUP function.
Okay, yeah, I was expecting that. Many or Minai, I'm not sure how the name is pronounced, Porat, was mentioning that the sequence function also returns a range when you were mentioning different functions that would return a range. I didn't check it, so I'm not sure.
So I think so there's a technicality there, because I think the sequence function returns an array, and that's the same with all of the new functions, which because when they first came out, I was quite excited because I thought you'd be able to use it in a chart source and various other things, but there is a there's a difference between how Excel thinks about arrays and how Excel thinks about ranges. So the dynamic array functions are not dynamic range functions. Excel translates the range that you use into an array. It then does its calculations as an array, and then it returns the result out into a spill range. But until you've got that result in a spill range, it's thinking in terms of an array rather than a range.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Oakley was asking about if the hidden named ranges would still work in formulas while they are hidden. Of course,
they do still work in formulas. I will just check that out. I believe so. No, I'm pretty yes. I think if you as long as you know the name of them, then that's fine.
Oh, because the IntelliSense won't find them when you're typing the formula, maybe.
Let me share my screen. We can
test.
Let's find out.
I was also thinking of Paula already had to leave, but she was presenting about the auditing tools, and some of the auditing tools were able to find named ranges. I was just thinking about the hidden named ranges, if those tools would still see them, but we will have to test that later.
So the hidden named ranges, I think, still
Sorry, Mark, do you want to drag my video tile there to another? Yeah, thank you.
So let me see. So we've got a named range called alpha here, for example. So if we open up the developer window, let's hide alpha.
If you hide a range, it still works. It has to work.
Yes. So it still appears, but you don't get it in your. It doesn't give you any IntelliSense to tell you that it's
there.
But if you type it, you get the right answer. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. They don't disappear completely.
They are just hidden. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if you used, I'm guessing that if you used Power Query or anything like that, those hidden name ranges probably still appear there. But I've not tried it, to be honest. But if you had any form of auditing tool, like I think it appears in the I can't think of the name of the tool now. The workbook compare tool. I think that probably shows your named ranges in there. I would expect it probably would.
Mm-hmm. We can test that, those who need to use those tools. And there was another question. This is a formatting related question from Bruce. On your on your spill range sheet.
Yes.
He was asking, how do you manage to get the underlined text across he called a merged cell, but I'm guessing that it's probably not a merged cell, or is it? On the spill range?
Let me just share that as well. So, there's two things to this. First of all, in the so if I test,
for example, here, where you have data there, I think.
Yes.
Let's see.
So if I select two cells there, go to the format window, go to alignment, and then center across selection, that will center that text across those two cells, but it's not a merged cell, which means that you don't get the annoying features of a merged cell, but the text appears as if it is centered within that merged cell. Now the underline feature, is in here in font, there's this thing called single accounting, which if you use that, you get the underline, which is useful, because then if you do that again, you get a small amount of white space between those two cells, so that when you don't have your grid lines on, it gives you a small amount of differentiation. So that white space is kind of indicating that that is a separate section or a separate piece of information. So in terms of presenting data from a visualization perspective, that small little bit of space there just helps the reader to know that this is a separate thing.
This is Dick here. There's another really good reason for that feature, is that it means you never have to put those stupid empty columns in between that you narrow down, right? So that you get the inchworm as you move across the thing, right? It totally eliminates the need for those, and that's huge benefit. I mean, you don't even need that space to not use them, but that's a real plus. Yes.
No, and I think the for a number of you, because I always used to like to have my columns all a similar width, and I never wanted a spacer column because it always broke something somewhere. And for years, I'd create a small white object and just put it over the top to create this little space. And then it turns out this feature's there all along.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
But no empty columns.
Please.
No.
All right. Who else has questions?
Is there anything else in the chat?
I didn't see anything else in the chat. There was one question about what's the difference between an array and a range, but I told them to reach out to you or me offline, because that could take half an hour to explain. Right? I mean, yeah. So.
Well, I think
you could try.
I think a range is something that will be physically on the worksheet. Well, I say physically, it is. You can see it on the worksheet when when an array is a group of numbers, which don't necessarily have to be on the worksheet. But yeah, it's an interesting.
No, don't try.
No.
And it doesn't have to be numbers. An array can be.
No, there can be anything.
So yeah, big question.
Yes.
Another time.
All I see, Mark, right now is lots of thank you.
Yeah.
So people are enjoying your session.
Thank you very much.
Oh, and they are asking about, sorry to interrupt you, Vivek, asking about the file. Mark announced at the beginning of the session that the file would be available, and I will be sending the link to those files as well when I send out the email with the video link to the meeting, to people who registered for the meeting.
Yes, and after this session, I will save the file that I've been working on, and I'll also add that into the download file, so that if anyone wants to, they've got the start file and the end file, so hopefully they can follow along with any of the techniques that have been shown.
Nice. Vivek, were you saying something else? And Alan, he's been so helpful on the chat. Thank you, Alan. Alan already posted the link to the files that Mark has shared before. Thank you, Alan. Very kind of you. Vivek, were you adding something else?
No, Celia, you covered everything. I just
thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Read some of the comments.
Do you want to turn on your video cameras and say hi to who is around?
My presentable.
And we can take a group picture. Let's see. Okay, together mode. Let's put together mode just because it became a tradition now. And I need to share my screen.
So at the same time, you can request everybody who can turn on their cameras.
Exactly. If you want to join us for a group picture, feel free to turn on your video, and then you will be assigned a seat in our auditorium. And you cannot complain about your seat. You cannot complain about your seat. You get what you get. There you go. Nice to see you all.
This is the class picture.
You always go to the back row, Alan. I don't know. Teams knows what you're, but I'm there just on your side. So
you're going to get me into trouble. You are. Well,
most likely.
Self into trouble, Alan.
To hug my friend next to me.
Mark,
Everybody sitting in the front row will see that your socks are too short.
Mark, by the way,
That in all our
Mark,
class
by the way, your initials are the same as mine. You're MP and so am I.
Me9 Porat.
Many Porat. Thank you very much for an excellent lecture.
Thank you very much.
As interesting as well as helpful. Thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Manny. Okay, so let me, I will take up, I'm not going to print now, but when I'm editing the video and uploading the video, then I go through the video and take some screenshots, and I will post them on Meetup and on LinkedIn. And so thank you. It's very good very nice to see you there, and kind of feels like we are meeting in the same place in person, which would be, who knows when, happening again, who knows when. Mark, can you please remind us how people can find you and connect with you?
Yes, so you can find me on my website, which is exceloffthegrid.com. I have a contact page on there, which I generally answer any questions that aren't spam or completely stupid. Or there's my email address, which is mark@exceloffthegrid.com. I would just say that the session that Brent's going to run in a few weeks, I'm very excited about that. He wrote a blog post about cube value or the cube functions, and for years I had struggled with cube functions. And if only he had written that about 2 years ago, it would have saved me so much time.
Come on, Brent. How could you not have written that before?
You're really putting a lot of pressure on here.
There's another session. I don't know, Brent, if you want to share that session that you sent me before. I don't know if you want to share that or send it to Mark. Maybe it's not a good idea because it will ruin your presentation a little bit. It will not be exactly the same, but some of the things will be common. So we will wait. Yeah, and yes, cube functions are amazing, and we don't know. I don't use them a lot, but they have been very helpful a couple of times. And the situations that Brent is going to cover, one of them was exactly my experience. Sometimes we really need to use those functions. Whoever
I wrote an article. Oh, sorry, Celia.
Go
I
ahead.
wrote an article about cube functions about 8 years ago, and it ended up on Power Pivot Pro. So if you look up Dick Moffat and cube functions, you'll find my article, which explains them. And it's at least 8, maybe 9 years ago. About a year after.
You'll be able to take that up with Rob Colley in a couple of weeks?
Yeah,
no.
That's Power Pivot.
No,
Power Pivot Pro. That's
no.
Yeah, the same person.
Yeah, no. Whatever.
Yeah, and I was going to say something about the cube function, but I forgot what it was. Never mind. Oh, I was going to say that it's one of the items that used to be part of the exam for the certification as Microsoft Excel expert. At least for the exam of Excel 2016, the cube functions are one of the items that show up on the list of contents, the list of items being that you can get a question on them. Not sure about 2019. I haven't gone through that exam. Okay, are we good for today? Any questions?
Exciting from the Ignite from Excel world?
There's news about. Oh, I should have prepared that. Maybe I'll send that on my.
That's why I'm reminding you.
Thank you. We should have done that before the session because now I know about. There was one thing at least, some improvements on calculations with certain formulas. And the Excel team has been working on improving the performance, and there was a session, a presentation about that, where Excel 2010 was being compared with the current version on Microsoft 365, and there were significant improvements on the calculation speed. Does anyone remember something else significant from the Ignite presentations that we could mention here?
Celia, there are so many great sessions about Excel on Ignite. So when you share slide, if you put that video link, there are amazing session on Excel.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll send the link to the Ignite website on when sending the email after the session. Okay, and there's the link for Brent's session, I think, there on the chat. You can pick that up too, and I will send it maybe. Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember to join us in about 2 weeks from now. It will be a different session because we will have multiple guests and people who have been active how do you say? They have been active collaborators and developers of the Excel team. It will be interesting to hear what they have to tell us. Thank you so much again, and enjoy your evening, and see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'll stop the recording. And I will